according to his own standards, but that his standards were those of a murderer and a liar whenever any German military advantage could be gained. Maxwell Fyfe confronted him with evidence of the bombing of Rotterdam after negotiations for surrender had begun, of the brutal treatment of hostages and partisans, of the involvement of the Luftwaffe in plans for attacks on Poland and Russia. Kesselring collapsed. The Times reported the short but devastating assault by Maxwell Fyfe as being as masterly a piece of cross-examination as the court has heard. He was to be equally effective with Goering's last witness. Birger Dahlroos was a Swedish businessman who had known Goering's first wife and had used the contact to arrange a meeting between Goering and 7 British industrialists in July 1939 at his own wife's house in Schleswig-Holstein. Dahlroos hoped to persuade the Nazis that the British would tolerate no more aggression by Germany. He had followed up the meeting with conversations with Lord Halifax and several British officials, approaches to Ribbentrop and Goering, and even a meeting with Hitler himself. In the autumn of that year, he had written a book about his efforts, The Last Attempt. Goering had read it in his cell at Nuremberg and had been keen to call Dahlroos as a witness to his peaceful intentions. Dahlroos had been most reluctant to appear for the defense, but in the end proved the most valuable prosecution witness. As Maxwell Fyfe guided him through the events of this period, Dahlroos was suddenly appalled to realize that, while he thought he was engaging the Nazi leaders in negotiations, they were already fixing the date to invade Poland and using him to conceal their aims. Even more embarrassing for the defense, it became clear that Goering must have read Dahlroos's book very cursorily, and that Staumer cannot have read it at all. Extracts read by Maxwell Fyfe described Goering's obsequious humility as Hitler ranted and screamed about planes, tanks, and exterminating the enemy. They described how, by the 1st of September, Goering was in some crazy state of intoxication, how he demanded huge chunks of the Polish corridor and called his demands a magnanimous offer. The book not only damaged Goering, it recorded that Dahlroos had been warned by Goering that Ribbentrop would try to sabotage his plans, and added the impression that the foreign minister had done everything in his power to prevent the success of the negotiation. As the cross-examination continued, Goering fumed and pulled at the cord on his headphones until a guard took it out of his hands before it was ripped off. That evening, Ribbentrop whimpered to Kaltenbrunner, "I don't know who to trust now." Though defendants had been shaken, testimony cut to pieces, and the case against Goering considerably higher, the prosecutors had little reason for self-congratulation. With witnesses of such low caliber, their task was all too easy. Even so, though the British had shown competence of a kind taken for granted in a minor trial at home, Rudenko and Jackson had shown a worrying lack of skill. What little success they had achieved had resulted not from their own talent, but from the ineptitude of the witnesses. Jackson had taken the main responsibility for the cross-examinations and had already shown some of the weaknesses which were soon to prove fatal. He was long-winded, leaving time for his points to be spotted and replies to be framed. On some occasions, it was not always clear what point he was trying to establish, or whether it really mattered, as the New York Times was quick to note. He was not always in control of his material, and more than once had muddled documents for being caught out on small details. And many defense counsel, on the other hand, had taken full advantage to examine witnesses in the interest of their own clients, and had made a relatively good job of it. Furthermore, the testimony they had extracted had not been challenged, as prosecution counsel concentrated on the Goering case. The prosecutors do not seem to have been troubled, though. Perhaps they could dismiss their poor performances as dress rehearsal failures. What did cause them anxiety was the time being taken by the Goering case. Staumer had encouraged his witnesses to make long statements. The number of questions from other defense counsel had dragged out the testimony even further. The prosecution cross-examinations had been unduly prolonged. All 14 had cross-examined Mill, an experience which brought home to them that they were taking far too long.
They've just lost the concentration, lost the ball as well. Now they've got to work hard to try and get it back. Josh Payne.
ways of shortening the proceedings. The British successfully argued that future cross-examinations be conducted by one prosecutor only, with short supplementary questions from others solely when national concerns were involved. They were not yet prepared to make official complaints about the time being taken by the defense, though it was already causing irritation. It had been noted with some alarm that though there had been a few tart comments from the bench, the judges had, on the whole, left the proceedings to run uninterrupted. The defense was being given ample leeway. The prosecutors thought too much. The judges had, however, intervened on one crucial point. They had ruled against defense questions on violations of international law by the Allies. Latencer had tried to introduce tu quoque evidence in his examination of Kesselring. Rudenko and Jackson had been quick to protest and argue that violation by one side never excuses violation by the other. Stamer had pleaded the need to examine matters which may contribute to a more lenient judgment of German behavior. In other words, the hope of establishing mitigating circumstances only, but he had not convinced the judges. Beaumont, at the Foreign Office, expressed some anxiety that the judge's ruling might be seen in the future as wrong, unfair. He was aware, however, that it would speed up the trial and prevent it bogging down in ding-dong battles of a particular incident. The tribunal, after all, was concerned not with individual acts, but with the allegation of a deliberate Nazi policy of atrocity. Though the ruling had been expected by the prosecution, it was useful to have it on the record at this early stage. With discomfort and with teeth sharpened on witnesses, they felt ready to deal with Goering himself. Goering went into the witness box on the afternoon of Wednesday, the 13th of March. For a moment, he looked nervous. His face was very flushed, and his hand shook when he raised it to take the oath. We stirred with expectation, the Times correspondent Bob Cooper remembered, when Goering left his corner and walked forward into the witness, his baggy trousers falling over high jacket, a thick sheet of papers under his arm. Not the Goering of pomp and power, but still a considerable figure. He was not the Goering of the newspaper cartoons and the Allied propaganda either. It had been all too tempting in recent years to believe that Goering was little more than the hail fellow well-met old Ares now run to seed. He had been caricatured as Happy Herman, dismissed as merely the smiling face of Nazism. He had been grossly underestimated. He was a man of great intelligence, nimble wit, wide grasp, and immense energy. The Reich had employed all too many third-rate incompetent dancers. Goering had shone by comparison. Even in 1946, after amassing the horrific evidence against the man, it was still dangerously possible to assume that he was now nothing more than the self-indulgent, pleasure-seeking, drug-impregnated Dagoblar with whom Hitler had lost patience, and who had sat in carrying holes for 2 years, changing his face and changing his jewelry. In fact, captivity had transformed the man. His trousers were baggy because prison food and some exercise had made him fitter than he had been for years. Weaning him for drugs had restored the clarity of his intellect and memory. His mind was fitter than ever. His courage was as great as it had ever been. He was not trammeled by false optimism or distracted by an urge to scrabble for loopholes of extenuation. Goering is certain he is going to be hanged, said Werner Brock, one of his assistant counsel. But he says he will die like a man. Goering's vanity, which had handicapped his career, was now transformed into a possible strength. He was resolved to pass into history as the hero who had remained true to his cause and given his powers and his life to defend it. He had decided to print his self-image on the future, to rally his faltering colleagues and reassure his nation degraded by defeat and wounded by calumny. Bross was known as an opponent of Nazism, yet there were tears in his eyes, thought his interviewer, when he spoke of Goering. After all, Goering is a fellow German, and even if he has done wrong, one cannot help feeling proud that he is living up to the best German traditions of courage and loyalty. Once Goering settled in the witness box, his stage fright went, and he seemed almost relaxed. The official film showed him quite still for the most part, preserving gestures with his right arm to colour key passages in his statement. Only before the start of each session can he be seen taking deep
on the same wavelength,
rubbing his hands and licking his lips. His voice was full and confident, projected without effort. There is a noticeable lack of theatricality in his testimony. The underplaying, perhaps, of a good actor. Throughout his examination, he directed few glances at the tribunal. He addressed most of his answers to his lawyer. Only occasionally did he look round the room to check the response and to involve his audience. He carried his thick wad of notes, but needed no more than a quick reference to prompt his next passage, or refresh his memory on details. He was proud of it. It is all from memory. You would be surprised how few cue words I have jotted down to guide me. Fluent and assured, with only rare feeds from Starmer, Yang delivered a carefully prepared statement for the whole afternoon. Then the next day, and the next. The tone was one of candor. It might alternatively be called a shameless confession of fact and attitudes that most men would have worked hard to deny. He not only acknowledged his position in the Nazi Party, the Luftwaffe, the four-year plan, the cabinet, in Hitler's inner coterie, he positively boasted of the authority he had wielded and the influence he had exerted. He was proud of the role he had played in destroying opposition to Nazism, what he called crushing so-called Sweden, obstacles to progress. He was proud of his role in foreign affairs, helping to fulfill an old longing of the German people to become a unified race, acquiring living space to establish the proper relationship between the population and its nourishment, its growth, and its standard of living. He cheerfully admitted that he had organized black markets in occupied countries. A black market is inevitable in times of scarcity. It is again flourishing in Germany today. He had no qualms about discussing many of his policies towards the Jews. Their influence, he said, had been out of all proportion to their numbers. It was National Socialist policy that Germany should be led by Germans. The Nuremberg laws were to bring about a clear separation of the races. Throughout his testimony, Goering savoured the opportunity to make jibes at his adversaries. Hitler had become head of state, government and the armed forces, he explained, following the example of the United States. He was accused of using Russian resources for German ends. Well, he replied, that was just as natural, just as much a matter of duty for us as it was for Russia when she occupied German territories. But with this difference, that we did not dismantle and transport away the entire Russian economy down to the last bolt and screw, as is being done here. An arguable point, but one which hit a sitting Russian target. Germany was criticized for seeking living space. Perhaps the situation is different for the four powers, he sneered, who call more than 3/4 of the world their own. He was being charged with war crimes, crimes against humanity. Was it not Churchill, he inquired pointedly, who had said, in the struggle for life and death, there is in the end no legality. But the main theme of his speech was complete acceptance of his own personal responsibility. Goebbels or Hitler might be blamed for the outrages of Kristallnacht, but as for the subsequent fines and economic laws against the Jews, I issued them, and consequently am responsible, and do not propose to hide in any way behind the Führer's orders. Then, I was responsible for the rearmament, the training, and the morale of the Luftwaffe. As for the negotiations and trickery which led to the Anschluss, not so much the Führer as I personally bear the full and entire responsibility for everything that happened. There was no hesitation in admitting to the measures for stripping the Russian economy. I naturally take complete responsibility for them. Where appropriate, Goering could reconcile his own responsibility with his praise for the Führer principle, the leadership principle, according to which power and policy flowed from Hitler. He made no attempt, as others had done and would continue to do, to suggest that the Führer principle removed from individuals their own obligations. Nor did he accept the prosecution accusation that it had constituted a tyranny. I upheld this principle, and I still uphold it positively and consciously. It had always existed in Germany, but especially necessary when a country was at a low ebb or in danger. In upholding it, Goering was proffering an umbrella to his colleagues in the dock. The Reich cabinet did not meet after 1937 because the Führer did not think much of cabinet meetings. The Führer, quite properly, never asked for the opinions or approval of his judgment. It was up to the leader to make the fundamental decision. He himself avoided using the shelter set up for him by Gorbachev. The idea that his worsening relationship with Hitler had cut him off from politics. He was too vain about his influence with the Führer to avail himself of that defense. He preferred to stress how often he had been consulted, the one significant exception being over the Stalag-Luft-3 affair. For all his skill, staunchness to old values, and sheer brass neck, Goering was not prepared to grasp some of the nettles standing in his path. He dodged quickly round matters like the Rhone Purge, the burning of Reichstag, and other cases of terrorism. He dismissed them as rare examples of other people getting out of hand. He would only talk of concentration camps being established for protective custody and a political act for the defense of the right. He fell back on the usual claim that after Himmler took control in 1934, no one knew what happened. He denied point blank that free workers were enslaved, or that the 4-year plan had an aggressive purpose. He stretched credibility to the very limit in arguing that Yugoslavia was mobilizing before she was attacked, that only military targets were bombed in Poland, that all bombing in Holland was intended to end the campaign as quickly as possible so as to save lives. Goering asserted that Leningrad was the only Russian city to suffer starvation, and that was because of the siege. That Russian agriculture and industry were built up, not destroyed. That prisoners in underground Luftwaffe factories were happier than in their camps, given what is known now.
For what? For fucking what?
Well, this might just be the nail in the coffin.
He was adamant in denial of knowledge of Zardin, of any order to lynch Allied terror crimes. Almost pathetically, he kept coming back to the allegations about his loot, a take on the heroic character he was trying to create. He described all art treasures as having been rescued from destruction, or deserted by their owners. Perhaps, he conceded, my collector's passion got the better of me when some French paintings were taken to North Germany. But I meant to pay for those objects which I wanted to have, even to give the money raised by the sale of the others to families of French war victims.
Good challenge here.
That kindly intention had been frustrated by the party treasurer. After completing his statement, Goering was examined by nearly all the defense counsel in turn. He rose to the occasion with seigneurial generosity and genuine cleverness. Everyone was afforded some protection. Everyone was presented with a suitable line of defense to develop, in some instances better than anything they were to manage later for themselves. Even so, to be defended by Goering was not a source of unalloyed satisfaction. His favorite means of carrying charges against his fellow defendants was to employ disparage. Title, he said, could make few decisions of his own. He came between the millstones of stronger personalities. The General Staff had little influence on military planning. They always showed such a very reticent and timid attitude. Ribbentrop and Rosenberg were too little respected to be given any say in foreign policy. Chirac and Seyss-Inquart were not dependable enough to be given much rein in their own spheres. Jodel's diary might say Germany was looking for an excuse to invade Norway, but that was just a typical example of his ignorance and poor judgment. In stressing the insignificance of the others, Goering was exalting his own position. He, not Papen, had negotiated the formation of the Nazi government in 1933. He, not Funk or Schacht, had been responsible for most economic decisions. No one had been privy to the Führer's plans in foreign policy, but Goering alone had sometimes been admitted to the private level. In this and other matters, at best only the Führer and I could have conspired. Goering's performance so far had made a tremendous impression. Dean praised his mastery of facts and persuasive manner. Several newspapers commented on the sustained note of sweet reasonableness by which he had secured the tribunal's non-intervention. They noted his subtlety and mental agility and expressed grudging admiration for his magnanimity to the other defendants in fighting their cause. These colleagues had certainly viewed much of the statement with delight. On the first evening, they had greeted his return to their box like fellow schoolboys greeting a classmate leaving the examination room. After the examination-in-chief, the handshaking and plaudits, the bright eyes and smiles of his comrades in the dock, happier than they have been for months, are proof that he is winning them over to his last-ditch stand at the Nazi regime in history. The praise had certainly continued below Speer. Speer said he had found the examination-in-chief good. Even Dönitz was impressed by Goering's control and commented that Biddle is really paying attention. You can see that he really wants to hear the other side of the story. Frank had been delighted, and no doubt relieved, by the way Goering was prepared to take responsibility for so much. He only wished he had always behaved so well. So did Neurath. Chirac was so swept away by his hero's performance, he believed it would be madness now to convict him because he is so popular, even in America. And you can see now why he was so popular. But where there was public praise, it was for the style of Goering's statement, and not for his content. In spite of all his care in preparation and the brilliance of his performance, Goering had failed to convince. It was acknowledged he had eased the defense for some of the others, but it was not felt he had succeeded in absolving the Nazi regime in any way. The general judgment was summed up in Dean's words. His story amounted almost to a plea of guilt. A personal and national too, he might have added. The case for National Socialism might have been put forcibly, but it had been made with too blatant a demonstration of the callousness and disregard for restraints and decencies on which that regime had rested. And where he could not brazen nor slither, Goering had too often relied on lies.
Could be dangerous.
Lies which laid him open to prosecution attack and which could impugn the rest of his testimony. He had given 12 hours of evidence, a remarkable physical and mental achievement if nothing else. He had spoken with hardly an interruption from the bench, delivering what was as much a plea to posterity as a defense, and he had been allowed to get away with it. Burkitt was horrified by the bench's tolerance of this approach. If this procedure is followed in the case of all the defendants, and long detailed statements are made covering important and unimportant points alike, then the time taken will be so great that the trial will be written down as a failure. It will have done much to restore German faith in their leaders, and a verdict against the leaders will be regarded by the German people as excessively unjust. But at least a performance of this length has given the prosecutors ample time to get the message and to sense something of his formidable power. Any good impression Goering had made in his examination-in-chief must now be wiped out by the cross-examination, and it was essential to pull him away from his broad generalizations and towards those specific charges on which the prosecution case was founded. This was the challenge faced by Robert Jackson when he opened the cross-examination on the 18th of March. Goering, who had been clearly exhausted when he left the stand on Friday, had had a weekend to recuperate. He was in fighting trim. As Jackson's sturdy, pugnacious figure crossed to the microphone, Goering cast a glance of reassurance at the defendant's face, then sat forward, a hand on each knee. He was hunched, alert, expectant. His eyes stayed fixed on Jackson's face like a swordsman looking for warning of the thrust that would come. And Jackson began slack and slow on his feet. He dragged through the early history of Nazism, the policies with which the party had gained control over Germany, the incidents with which he no doubt hoped to illustrate its criminality. The Times correspondent and others were amazed that he should spend so much time on such side issues. It seemed a clear tactical mistake to allow Goering to warm up before introducing the more vital charges on which the main case was based. But then Jackson had always seen the entire prosecution case teleologically, the final crime being implicit in the very origins of the regime. Whether the issues were well chosen or not, Jackson did not use them effectively. He skipped from one topic to another, using little or no documentary evidence to support the allegations he was making. His questions were general and imprecise. Goering seized them, condescendingly divided them into more specific sections, then dealt with each at great length. He was parrying Jackson with each, and taking an opportunity to repeat all the justifications, all the boasts he had made in his examination-in-chief. Jackson became increasingly irritated as Goering avoided direct answers. The official film shows him jabbing his pen into the rostrum, or turning it over and over in mounting agitation as Goering's rhetoric gained force. He played into Goering's hands with questions on the Röhm Purge and the burning of the Reichstag. Strong suspicions there might be, but Jackson had no conclusive evidence to prove Goering's connection with either incident. Goering could flick away with ease affidavits from 3 SA men that he had provided materials for the Reichstag fire. He then had the confidence to add that he had no regrets about its destruction from the artistic point of view. He only lamented having to replace the building with my Kroll Opera House. The opera seemed to me much more important than the Reichstag. Jackson did not even use the documentary evidence, which undoubtedly existed, on Goering's aggressive intentions towards Austria and Czechoslovakia. He left him to counter the accusations with contentious statements about policies in these areas having followed the principle of self-determination established by the Versailles Treaty. When at last Jackson began to introduce evidence, Goering threw it back at him, pointing out, for example, that the minutes of a meeting where Jackson alleged he began the process of rearmament in 1933 merely said that the policy had been discussed, not begun. By the time the session finished, it was all too clear who had won the battle. Well, said an American reporter, I guess Jackson has been saved by the gods. Goering's performance had impressed Russia. He wrote, he reveals himself as a very able man who perceives the intent of every question almost as soon as it is uttered. He has considerable knowledge and has an advantage over the prosecution in this respect, for he is always on familiar ground. He has therefore quite maintained his ground, and the prosecution has not really advanced its case at all. Certainly, there has been no dramatic destruction of Goering, as had been anticipated. Several newspapers, too, noted that Jackson had failed to extract a single admission which had not already been made in direct evidence, and had not even drawn attention to the guilt they exposed. Dean had checked on the professional judgment of Jackson's performance. Among the lawyers it had been severely criticized. He reported their complaints that Jackson had failed to reveal Goering's frequent lies, and had not used the good material which everyone knew was available. It was bad enough to have mishandled the first day of cross-examination in such a vital part of the case. It was more